just didn't expect I'd find her like this. I didn't expect I'd find her.
When you say to yourself, that's the worst thing I've ever heard, stick around. That's Berlin. Now it is. There's always something worse.
If you love movies, you know that any discussion about, or perhaps argument over, the best movie ever made is going to at least mention Casablanca. Michael Curtiz's 1942 landmark film is one of the greatest products of the Hollywood studio system. The film is legendary. It's iconic. As Noah Eisenberg wrote in his terrific book, We'll Always Have Casablanca, quoting Umberto Eco, Casablanca is not one movie, it is movies. Many, many movies exist in its very long shadow, but few, if any, have intentionally attempted to step into that shadow. But that's where Steven Soderbergh comes in. His 2006 picture, The Good German, is in direct conversation with one of the greatest films ever made, a film everyone knows, even if they've never seen it.
On today's episode of the Filmographers podcast, we'll discuss whether The Good German is an homage to Casablanca and other movies like it, or a deconstruction, or something else entirely. I'm Keir Graff.
And I'm Michael Moreci, and we welcome you to the Filmographers podcast, the show where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time.
In our first season, we're turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, discussing why each one of his films succeeded or failed, looking at it in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time it was released. Over the course of this season, we've often been puzzled by Soderbergh's choices as a filmmaker. Sometimes we've cringed, sometimes we've cheered, but we've always been fascinated. And his decision to stand on the shoulders of cinematic titans and make The Good German might be his most interesting decision yet.
Berlin, 1945. The war is over. A military journalist sent to cover the peace is about to become part of the story. If war is hell, what comes after?
An American serviceman turns up dead on the eve of the peace conference. The Russians want us to go away. We want it to go away too.
Whoever wanted him dead had access to the delegations. That means somebody pretty high up.
What's your angle?
Why do I have to have an angle? My driver, a kid named Tully. The Americans are looking for him and the Russians. Why?
Hey! Where'd you get those bruises on your face? Wasn't over a girl, was it?
I show up in Berlin and the driver assigned to me is running around with my old girlfriend.
I'll get you out of here. You watch.
That's a coincidence.
You should never have come back to Berlin.
If I can find you, so can they. What is it you're not telling me? I would have gotten you out. I still would.
You can never really get out of Berlin.
You've seen what one bomb can do to a city. That's the future. Future of mankind's in our hands.
She's playing you, Jake. You have no idea what you're dealing with.
Who got to you? I want to know.
You find that girl. We'd like to talk to her. Get out now. Go. Before you get hurt.
Let's not forget that we are fighting for peace and for the welfare of mankind.
Keir, we have a lot to discuss today, but before we dive in, can you honor our long-standing tradition and give me your one-sentence description of the movie.
I can, Mike. When war correspondent Jake Geismer returns to Berlin after the fall of the Third Reich, he finds his own hard-earned cynicism is no match for the reality. As he investigates the murder of an American black marketeer, he is robbed, repeatedly beaten, and learns the brutal truth about his pre-war flame, Lena Brandt.
Well, let me check with our judges. Yeah, you still got it. Perfect tens. Now,
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Before we go further, because I feel like we're going to go pretty deep, I want to ask just simply baseline, did you like The Good German?
I didn't like it. I loved it. I didn't totally get it the first time I saw it many years ago, but I remember definitely thinking it was interesting and liking certain things about it. But now, after repeated viewings and maybe as a more mature film watcher myself, I just think it's masterful. It's one of Soderbergh's most surprising, but also one of his strongest films. What about you?
Like I texted you the other day, prepare yourself. I fucking love The Good German. It's one of my favorites. It's climbed not quite up to the summit of Out of Sight or, something like The Limey, but damn is it close and closer than I ever anticipated.
So we're in agreement. Let's move on.
Let's. I want to start by reading a quote from Soderbergh, which I think will serve as an appropriate jumping off point for the conversation I want to have. This comes from Positif, a French film magazine, and Soderbergh says, quote, "All the characters are compromised. Nobody can claim to have a moral superiority. The choices facing each character can only be bad ones. They all involve compromises. I do not, however, see this as anti-American. This corruption is the inevitable byproduct of a post-war society. When I approached Warner Brothers, I warned them that this would be the first American film on the war from which the viewer would emerge depressed." Indeed, where we would not make the sacrifices to the myth of the last good war, where you would see the flip side of the coin. End quote. Now, to start things off, I want to discuss the cinema of cynicism because, in my opinion, this is a really cynical movie, and I think that's a very deliberate choice, something we'll discuss further in a moment. But for now, I'm going to throw the question in your direction, Keir. What did you think of the tone of The Good German, or more appropriately than the tone, the film's character?
It's bleak, Mike. Bleak. So very, very bleak. But you could argue that it's the only appropriate response to a film that is, at its heart, is about the horrors of the Holocaust and the complicity of everyday people in the death of millions of Jews. Some people say it's impossible or immoral to make art about that event. And of course, this does not depict the Holocaust itself, but what happened next. It's about complicity. And I guess maybe Soderbergh's saying this isn't the kind of thing we should be making lighthearted entertainment about.
No, I agree. It is bleak. There are certainly, we've seen them movies that are very, very much downers of film. And I enjoy those films from time to time. I guess you can categorize them. It doesn't feel as personal as some of those bleak movies would feel, but it still has this edge of really, really deep darkness within it. And like I said, I feel like it's intentional, It goes without saying, but I've teed that up because I do find it to be a cynical movie, and you can replace the word cynical with bleak, and I think they're both perfect. We played that clip at the start of the show of Danny, the bartender, who's also wears different hats as a character, but he says there's always something worse. What's interesting is he's not the only character who says that. George Clooney's character, Jake Geismer, who's referenced before, says it. So does Leland the lawyer. And while the other lead, Lena Brandt, played wonderfully by Cate Blanchett, doesn't say it, her attitude clearly leads you to believe that she's always expecting the next worst thing. Once upon a time, everyone believed that World War I was the war to end all wars. That's a quote. And then, barely 20 years later, it got a sequel. So yeah. The Good German, though, is driven by this obsession over what's next, what comes after the war. People call this the post-war period, but I heard another very interesting word for it. In the commentary for The Third Man by none other than Steven Soderbergh and Out of Sight scribe Tony Gilroy calls this the aftermath period, which I find to be a really interesting twist. It places more emphasis on reckoning. Something momentous just happened, and we're still dealing with it even though it's over. The word post seems to imply that something's over and we're past it. In war, what comes after, ostensibly, is peace. That's why the world's leaders, Stalin, Truman, Churchill, were gathered in Potsdam, and this takes place in the film and in real life. They came together to end the war, to decide on borders, and begin the process of putting the Nazis on trial. But in The Good German, no one seems to be concerned with peace, at least not to the degree that it prevents them from planning or at least preparing for the next conflict. In both the film and real life, the world powers are determined to track down and capture Nazi scientists and engineers, not to bring them to trial, but to bring them to their side. There's always something worse, all these characters say. And what's worse is what follows. What we experience in The Good German isn't the end of global conflict. It's merely a pause. And a short pause at that, because just 1 week after this Potsdam Peace Conference, the U.S. would drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan.
Yeah, the movie's cynicism toward power after the war is well-founded. We all know the U.S. enlisted many Nazi scientists after World War II, but not everyone knows that, just how vile some of those people were. And that lack of knowledge is not an accident because it was written out of the history books. But the flip side of the United States' heroic invasion of Normandy and the race to defeat Hitler is the way that we and all the occupying powers schemed to divide up the spoils. And some of the spoils we were most interested in were Nazi scientists.
Yeah, there's the story of Werner von Braun, the leading Nazi rocket scientist who was smuggled into the U.S. after the war. According to this legend, von Braun's office window had a view of the crane that Jews were hung from, Jews who were slaves in von Braun's underground factories. Now, von Braun later denounced his SS legions or tried to justify it, but his compliance with the Nazi agenda is hardly in doubt. And yet, von Braun was never tried. In fact, in 1975, he was awarded the National Medal of Science.
Which brings us to Franz Bettmann, the von Braunian Nazi scientist in The Good German, who the Americans are trying to smuggle out of Germany. This movie isn't shy about illustrating his atrocities. In an effort to build a base that would be undetectable by the Americans, Bettmann and his people, including Emil Brandt, had Jewish prisoners carve out tunnels in sulfur mines. They fed them only the calories necessary to survive for 3 months of hard labor, and when one died, they were quickly replaced by another. 30,000 Jews in total died building Bettmann's base. And what most concerns the Americans isn't making him pay for the lives he took, but expunging his wartime activities so he can come to America with a clean record. But then you have Lena, Emil's wife. And this is where the film's morality gets complex. Like Emil, she's guilty of a horrific crime, but the guilt is very different. This is obviously a spoiler, but we've repeatedly told listeners this podcast is one big spoiler.
Right.
We learned that Lena, a half-Jewish woman, sold out a dozen Jews to the Gestapo to ensure her own survival. She's not a scientist. She wasn't making bombs, but she was a woman placed in an unimaginably grim situation, being a Jew in Nazi Germany, and she did what she had to do in order to stay alive. Atrocious, but unlike Bettmann, maybe understandable through a certain lens. If you really want to size the two up or make the impossible calculus of weighing lives against another, Lena was responsible for a dozen deaths. At one point, Bettmann is believed to be responsible for 30,000.
A lot more. And yet, Bettmann, we learn in the film, is being stashed and protected in a safe house by the Americans, and Lena is on the run wherever she goes. And that's why her need to escape Germany on her own terms, not with Batman, not even with her own husband, is possible. It drives everything she does. She needs leverage. Though she's far less of a war criminal than Batman or even Emil, she has no value. Like you said, she's not a scientist. She's not capable of making rockets or bombs. She can't provide a justification for her smuggling, and she knows that. She's smart enough to know that. I mean, when pitching this movie, like we said, this is during the pitch, according to Soderbergh's legend. He told everyone that they would walk out depressed, and he certainly delivered.
Nobody ever accused Soderbergh of shading the truth.
From the very beginning, the script itself informed how the film had to be shot, and there's just nobody better to take risks in film with than Steven Soderbergh.
Steven and George decided to shoot this film with 1940s dialogue and 1940s equipment, like boom mics and old-fashioned black and white cameras.
Nice little game of cat and mouse you got going on, while everybody smokes the peace pipe.
And Soderbergh insisted that the actors act like 1940s actors when bigger was considered better.
Yeah, I think as the performance style, because all of the elements of the film, the lighting, the design, the music, was so heightened to be more of an akin to a 1940s style, the acting style had to come up as well.
Soderbergh has said that he couldn't make this movie in 1940 whatever, or even in the 1950s. And the reason wasn't because of the lack of technology, which is often the reason why a filmmaker will say, I couldn't make it at whatever time. It's usually because the technology wasn't there. And for those who don't know, from 1934 to 1968, the movie industry operated under the Hays Code, or the Motion Picture Production Code, which they were a set of guidelines imposed by the studios themselves that basically outlined cinematic censorship. Now, here we can devote an entire episode, if not more, to the history of the Hays Code, but the broadest definition possible is that the code defined what could and couldn't be depicted in movies. Things like sex, profanity, violence. It couldn't depict immoral things like adultery and crime as being attractive, and in the end of each movie, good had to be rewarded and evil had to be punished. Now, why does this matter for the good German? Superficially, yes, there's violence, there's profanity, and sex in this film. But the reason it couldn't be made in the 1940s is much deeper than that. You'd never get away with the tone of this movie, the darkness, or, Keir, as you said, the bleak outcome.
And regardless of the Hays Code, no studio would have made a movie during wartime that depicted Americans as anything less than unambiguous good guys. I mean, sure, you might have had a black marketeer like Tully, maybe, but his death would have been served up as proof that he was the rare exception to the American ideal and that justice always triumphs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, his character would have been handled exactly like you said. I think that's perfect. It would have been so much different, whole different lens that would have, given us Tully. But with that all in mind, that's why The Good German is no homage to Casablanca, nor is it simply a subversion. America at the end of World War II, in terms of the people, the broader culture, believed that peace had been achieved, that evil had been vanquished, and all was right in the world. They just didn't know the way George Clooney's character, Jake, doesn't know. It's like they're living according to the rules of the Hays Code, but that's not how the real world works. Now, don't get me wrong, Jake is a cynical character and smart, who's clearly seen a lot, but only to a point. He's still a victim of that strong-willed American spirit that believes it can force truth and justice into being. But like most Americans, Jake doesn't get it. Jake never knows exactly what is going on. Like he's the smartest know-nothing.
Keep expecting him to revert to form and be like, yeah, George Clooney, the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah,
it doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't. It's such a, and we'll talk about his performance, which I love, but it's such a it's such a bold choice for him to play like this guy who, and not only does he know nothing, but he is constantly told what is going on. And he doesn't believe anybody ever. Like they're telling him, and he seems to know, he has a cynicism to everything. He before, and this is a quick aside, when he gets picked up by Tully.
Yeah, I know where you're going.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, the fine, Fraulein who, is the fair maidens of the Third Reich, and she didn't lift a finger to do anything. But then when it literally comes to his doorstep, his attitude, I mean, granted, it's love ostensibly that changes that, but like, he seems to know, but cannot apply it.
His character predicts the ending of the movie.
Yes.
And can't believe it when it actually comes true.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll talk about that ending because that ending is.
But yeah, a moment's shout out. We'll talk about performances, but just, a moment's shout out to George Clooney, because I don't know. I think he gets a lot of stick for being a limited actor. He is somewhat a limited actor, but we've seen through his collaborations with Soderbergh, he has actually taken some big career risks, and whatever. I guess he's always had other things to fall back on, and the Oceans franchise kept him afloat and whatever. But, he tried something really hard in Solaris, and I don't think he's succeeded in that, but he tried. It was a big swing. Mm-hmm. Here, he's really playing against type as like, the way he tosses his cigarettes in this film, like he seems like he's going to be the super cool American who's just got it all wired, and he knows he's going to figure it all out.
Yeah.
But he knows going into this project that that's not the role he's playing. Like he's an interesting guy, I think, because of these choices he makes, like Soderbergh.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know this at the time of recording our Solaris episode, but he actually wrote an actual letter, handwritten, trying to convince Soderbergh. And I don't know if this brought Soderbergh around, or if Soderbergh already had Clooney in mind. They were partners at Section 8, which is a producer on Solaris, but he wrote this handwritten letter making an appeal to allow him to play I forget his name, Kelvin, to play the lead in Solaris. And he said he would do it for free. And granted, he's got however many millions, so it is a bit of a gesture, but at the same time, like, it shows his commitment to taking the risk. And this is I feel like this character is a really, really big risk, and it's an interesting risk. And I think he does really well with it. I mean, he lets Tobey Maguire beat the shit out of him. I mean, that's just that.
Was originally trying to cast, because he had another actor definitely in mind when Clooney wrote that letter.
Oh, for Kelvin?
Yeah.
I don't know. No.
Sorry, listeners. Update. It was Daniel Day-Lewis.
But speaking of know-nothings.
Nice transition.
Yeah, there we go. There is a lot of comparisons, and we've been making the comparison of The Good German to Casablanca. But I feel it's far more actually. Well, maybe not far, but it's more of a spiritual successor to Carol Reed's 1949 masterpiece, movie that I love, The Third Man, which also has a know-nothing, Holly Martin.
Yeah, it's funny because, The Good German often got compared to Casablanca at the time of its release. I would definitely argue it's far more of a spiritual successor to that Carol Reed masterpiece. I mean, we obviously both thought of that film a lot while we were watching it.
Yeah, I think any, I know we're pretty smart and educated film goers.
Speak for yourself.
But it's not that hidden. It's clear, but there are, it's easy to make that jump.
So let's check some boxes here in relation to The Good German and The Third Man, right? You got a wandering know-nothing American. Check. Though you could argue that Joseph Cotton's Holly Martin is more of a know-nothing than Clooney's Jake. They both know little. Holly knows less. It's set in post-war Europe, right? You got Berlin versus Vienna, but divided into zones. Check. A character everyone is looking for, but doesn't appear in the film until the third act. Getting a little stronger here. Check. Underground sewers, a vital location. Check. Throw in the fact that Soderbergh did a commentary track for The Third Man, and it's no mystery just how much The Third Man influenced The Good German.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to, steal or be influenced, be influenced by the greats, and that is one of the greats, without a doubt. I mean, it's a movie I love. I paid a lot of money for the Criterion version when it went out of print. But yeah, like The Good German, The Third Man also isn't without its cynicism, though, because like we've said with the Hays Code and etc., it's far more subtextual. It's probably as much as let me put it this way. It's probably as much as they could have gotten away with at that time, even in England, where the post-war period was a lot more bleak than it was in America. I mean, Harry Lime, the Orson Welles character, legendary role for sure, is selling watered down penicillin on the black market. I guess you can say if there's any comparison to Good German, he's most like Tully, which is Tobey Maguire's character, just smarter. Lime, Orson Welles, sees the corruption all around him, and he sees the opportunity it brings. When everyone's concerned with larger crimes, like expunging the records of Nazi war criminals and bringing them to the U.S., the smaller ones tend to slip through the cracks. It's how society gets corrupted. As the proverb goes, the fish rots from the head down.
Yeah, and like as Tully says in The Good German, he's like, everybody wants to go home. I don't know why. I don't remember the exact quote, but he's like, this is like the greatest place to be.
Yeah, he seems to like, and I don't want to say, Harry Lime is just smarter because he's clearly more clever. And all throughout The Third Man, he's pulling all these strings. He faked his own death. He's able to, operate in the Vienna, like literally in this underground. Like he is doing a lot of intelligent stuff. But Tully does, I would venture to guess, get it more even than Jake does.
Oh yeah, totally. Tully gets it. He gets in over his head. He doesn't realize. I mean, neither of them kind of realizes the power of the forces arrayed against them, but Tully is too cocksure, I guess.
Yeah. It ends up being his undoing. And I say Lena knows that, but she sure does. Because
she's directly responsible for his undoing.
Yeah. So she did know that. But yeah, they are comparable, I would say, for sure. Now, I want to circle back to an interesting point about people not knowing anything, because it's true. Holly and Jake don't know a whole lot to different degrees, but they're seemingly representative of America, maybe even Europe too, in this post-war period. This like naivete that actually believed that the world would be at peace. There's a scene at the end of The Good German that will always haunt me. And like we've said, we give spoilers. So this is a spoiler. So this happens, not the direct ending, but very close to it.
Just, order the DVD like the rest of us, watch it, and then, come back and listen to the rest of this episode.
Yes, or skip like 15 seconds. At the end of the film, when Emil and Lena are finally going to make their way to America, things go bad and they have to run for their lives. And I'm not going to give all the details, but they're on the run now in very close proximity to a bad person. Emil tries to escape through a parade, which is celebrating, it's never really clear, it's celebrating something or other. And he ends up getting murdered by a German, for lack of a better term, muscle or thug, something like that.
He's shadowing the American prosecutor who's like seeking to prosecute the war crimes. And what's that character's name? The German guy?
It's
Gunther. Which made me think of Bernie Gunther, which is a Philip Kerr investigator in some World War II mysteries in Berlin. At any rate, he's introduced as somebody who doesn't speak English, and he's always present, but they talk in front of him as though it's fine. He's not absorbing anything. He's just there to whatever, represent German interests. I don't know. But he turns out to be the heavy.
Right. And I wonder if he's actually there to keep an eye on the lawyer, Bernie.
Leland Orser is the actor, and
Bernie's his name as the lawyer, right? I think it is. But either way, the lawyer character, he's there to aid the lawyer, but I think he's more keeping an eye on him, keeping tabs on his activities. He's working for Beau Bridges' character, I would venture to guess, given what ends up happening. But that all said, so Emil is murdered by Gunther, and it happens right in the middle of the crowd. And what's so eerie is that as he is murdered, everyone's clapping and everyone's cheering and it's a parade and it's this happy moment. And meanwhile, right in the middle of the celebration, not only does a man die, but so does the truth. You know, Emil is the only person who could have brought Batman to justice, and he was going to tell the truth. Now, you don't know what truth he was going to tell, or he was trying to save himself in the process, but he was at least going to go on record and say what Batman had done in those mines. But with him out of the way, Batman can cleanly escape to the US, a fresh start to a man who should be facing a firing squad.
Don't be so gloomy. After all, it's not that awful. Well, what the fella said. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So long, Holly.
Soderbergh often refers to himself as a synthesist, someone who pulls in influences and styles that fluctuate from one movie to the next. He's less of an auteur in the sense that he lacks overarching obsessions like a Kubrick or a Hitchcock or even a defining style. He's more of a Sidney Lumet or a Michael Curtiz, as we've noted before multiple times, bringing the right style to each and every one of his projects, fluidly absorbing whatever's inspiring him.
Can I say we're like this Michael Curtiz thing? It's like, I feel so vindicated. Anybody who is like, where are they going with this Michael Curtiz? Here, we're going right here. Because Michael Curtiz directed, guess what?
Casablanca.
So
full circle.
We did it. Full circle. Doesn't Soderbergh have a limited series named Full Circle? Wasn't it what that HBO Max was called?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it was something Circle.
I should know.
But the point is,
filmographer.
We were right about this. We were right. Because we've discussed the idea of Soderbergh as an auteur. You know, we've discussed that he is an auteur, just his own kind of auteur. And that's something you can put Curtiz into that same bucket. But we'll table that for now. Maybe that's a whole different episode. But it's fitting, though, getting back on track, it's fitting that the plot roads in The Good German end up culminating in a cinema. Emil ends up being stashed in a projectionist booth, which, you know, on one hand is just a cool location, so fine. But knowing what we know about Soderbergh and the goals of this specific movie, it feels really appropriate.
Agreed. Like we've said, people have confused The Good German as being an homage to Casablanca. And to be fair, it was marketed that way. But it's a film in conversation with Casablanca, but in no way a loving tribute. We've already detailed a lot of the reasons why. The moral complexities, the unflinching look at the ambitions of the world's powers to prepare themselves for the next war while the current one is barely over. But the way The Good German turns Casablanca inside out is no more apparent than in its final moments. I mean, the ending of Casablanca, one of the most romantic moments in cinema history, right? I mean, it's in terms of the pop culture impact, it shows up in yacht rock, right? Here's looking at you, kid. Yeah. Although that's a confused song because they're also quoting they're confusing with other Bogart movies. At any rate, who doesn't know that line, right? Here's looking at you, kid. Who doesn't get a warm feeling hearing that line and gazing upon Ingrid Bergman's lovely face?
True.
Right? But by the time The Good German comes to its conclusion, which takes place in an airport tarmac that is clearly designed to evoke Casablanca, there's not a drop of romanticism left. Jake came back to Berlin to find Lena. He loved her. But the Lena he finds is not the Lena he knew, in part because of the survival skills he taught her. As they walk to the plane, he finally comes face to face with what everybody has been telling him the entire movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's every time you watch, and I watched it a few times, becomes more painfully obvious, like the signs that people are holding up for Jake that he either willfully doesn't want to see or just can't see. It's unclear, but like like you said, there's no romanticism to the end. And again, we know that Soderbergh said people would leave depressed, and there is something to that. I mean, we laugh at it, but like the bitter truth that's there, like Jake and the audience finally, we didn't know what Lena did. And we finally get the answer that's at the heart of the movie. That's what did she do? Everyone's kind of dancing around that. It's not like the mystery. There's a lot going on, and you don't always focus on it throughout the film. It kind of comes and goes, and it's very indirect at times until later, but it's there, and it's what's been driving her through the entire movie. Like, we were saying earlier, she needs to get out alone. There's a reason why she can't go with her husband, a reason she can't go with Bettman. Not maybe because she does detest them, or at least Bettman, but also because of her value and because of this thing hanging over her. And it's because she has no value, like we've already said. All she has at this point, and everything's laid bare, all she has is her crime, which is well documented. And as Bernie, like we said, the military lawyer has told Jake, it's enough to put her in prison for the rest of her life. But unlike Bettman or Emil, she didn't commit her crimes in the name of science or in devotion to the state. She did it to survive. Her actions may be repugnant, but morally, her sins are more justifiable than Emil's or Bettman, yet she's the one who's pursued and made to answer for what she did.
And when Jake learns this, it's too much for him. He's still stuck with his antiquated American notions of right and wrong, which no one else in the movie follows but him. In Casablanca's conclusion, Rick relearns his heroism, his understanding that there's bigger things than the wants and needs of the individual, and his sacrifice is heroic. There's no such heroism here, no such sacrifice, only survival and truth. And it's the truth that breaks Jake. Lena won't compromise, and Jake won't judge her for it, but he can no longer love her. And when she gets on that plane without him, just like Ilsa did, there's no feeling of warmth and love, just a cold sense of what the world does to people and how some people get national medals of science and some are forced into hiding.
Louis, have your man go with Mr. Laszlo and take care of his luggage.
Certainly, Rick. Anything you say. Find Mr. Laszlo's luggage and put it on the plane.
Yes, sir.
This way.
If you don't mind, you fill in the names. That'll make it even more official.
You think of everything, don't you?
And the names are Mr. and Mrs. Victor Laszlo.
But why my name, Richard?
Because you're getting on that plane.
I don't understand. What about you?
I'm staying here with him till the plane gets safely away.
No, Richard, no. What has happened to you last night?
Last night we said a great many things. You said I was to do the thinking for both of us. Well, I've done a lot of it since then. It all adds up to one thing. You're getting on that plane with Victor where you belong.
But, Richard, no,
Now, you've got to listen to me. You have any idea what you'd have to look forward to if you stayed here? 9 chances out of 10, we'd both wind up at a concentration camp. Isn't that true, Louis?
I'm afraid Major Strasser would insist.
You're saying this only to make me go.
I'm saying it because it's true. Inside of us, we both know you belong with Victor. You're part of his work, the thing that keeps him going. If that plane leaves the ground and you're not with him, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life.
But what about us?
We'll always have Paris. We didn't have, we lost it until you came to Casablanca. We got it back last night.
When I said I would never leave you.
And you never will. But I've got a job to do, too. Where I'm going, you can't follow. What I've got to do, you can't be any part of. Ilsa, I'm no good at being noble, but it doesn't take much to see that the problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. Someday you'll understand that. Now. He's looking at you, kid.
There's a great article from David Keir in the New York Times published on November 12, 2006, just a month before The Good German's theatrical release. It's a really great piece that offers insight into Soderbergh's mind while trying to make The Good German. Here's my personal favorite line from it. I often think that I would have been so happy to be Michael Curtiz. That would have been right up my alley, making a couple movies of years of all different kinds, working with the best technicians. I would have been in heaven, just going into work every day. End quote. I want to share this just because it solidifies what we've been saying all season. Soderbergh is the modern Curtiz, and now you have it straight from the horse's mouth, case closed.
The studio system may no longer exist, but Soderbergh is doing his best to work as if it still does. Even his frantic pace of making films seems to suggest that. It's probably no longer possible to make as many movies as the studio directors did back when the apparatus existed to support them. Curtis made over 100 movies, all for Warner Brothers. But now that I say that, I wouldn't bet against Soderbergh to make 100 movies before he retires for real. Let's see. He makes about a movie a year. He's 61 years old. Well, I guess he'd have to live to be 125. But maybe
pick up the pace,
Steve. But against the studio argument, he still has some weirdo tendencies like Schizopolis, Full Frontal, and Bubble as evidence in that exhibit. There's enough Godard in him to keep him interesting and to make him iconic. But maybe it's better to say Soderbergh pairs the artistic flair of Godard with the workmanlike commitment of Curtiz.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think that's where he tends to exist. Like we've said a lot, Soderbergh exists a lot in mediums, middle grounds. Yeah. He finds these really interesting places between one influence and another, between one format and another. He's just always finding these interesting spaces to carve out and find his own satisfaction within them.
Befitting a synthesist.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. That's what he does. And it's not just a synthesis of style and influence, but it's a synthesis of everything. He's just so encyclopedic. And it's just wonderful. And in a twist of fate, getting back to Curtiz, The Good German, like Casablanca, was made by Warner Brothers.
Serendipity or proof our theory is right? You be the judge.
What's really interesting, though, is that not only was Soderbergh trying to get inside of Curtiz's mindset, he was also committed to recreating the conditions in which he worked. The Good German was shot as if it had been made in the 1940s, meaning lots of studio backlots, sets local to Los Angeles, camera lenses only available at the time. I find that especially really crazy, to be honest. Yeah. And all incandescent lighting, no fluorescence. Soderbergh said this, which, God, I absolutely love this. So, quote, I did some research and found some script continuities from a couple of Michael Curtiz films. I found that he restricted himself to at most 5 lenses, usually 3 or 4. I talked to Panavision, and they happened to have some older lenses that they'd made that they didn't really have all the new coatings on them, and also were a focal length that isn't really used anymore. One of them was a 32 millimeter, a wide-angle lens that nobody uses anymore, but was one that Curtiz used a lot.
Oh my God, I love that so much. I talked to Panavision.
Yeah, I can't imagine him going to Panavision direct. I don't know whom exactly. I would imagine there's more than one person.
1-800-Panavision.
Yeah. I'd like to speak to Jimmy Panavision, please.
Yeah. Do you have any of the lenses that Michael Curtiz used?
Yeah, it's like such a fucking wild conversation. Like, who's at the other end of that line being like,
there's got to be some like lens guru, lens whisperer at Panavision.
Oh, yeah. There's some many camera nerds there who were like really into the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And you've got a director like who's going to use your stuff and like, oh, yeah, we still got this on the shelf. It's so cool.
Yeah.
And this is my obsession, but just like Bubble, which could not be a more different film, he's using a tripod. Oh, how I love it when Soderbergh dusts off a tripod. So easy on the eyes. But from what I've been able to gather, the type of shooting from that period of Hollywood was, it's already pretty close to how Soderbergh makes movies anyway. As we've discussed in previous episodes, he's a director who doesn't love coverage. Most directors will film the same scene from many different angles, a master shot, something closer, some over the shoulder, et cetera, just so if they screw up, they're covered. That's where the word comes from. But Soderbergh doesn't do that. He pre-edits the movie in his head and shoots only what he thinks he'll need when he assembles the takes. It's like working without a safety net because there's no changing your mind once you're in the editing room. Although parenthetically, Soderbergh does tend to do a day or two of reshoots for almost every movie he makes.
Interesting. Okay.
But it does force directors to make decisions and stick to them.
Yeah, I mean, there's this old adage but like other things that Soderbergh maybe doesn't conform to. It's there's three movies. There's the movie you write, the movie you film, and the movie you edit. I think it's two for Soderbergh. I think it's the movie he writes or not he writes, but script,
Yeah.
And the movie that he shoots and he's editing, he's like pre-editing. So I guess he just combines the two, but he's not like they'll say, well, I will find it in the edit,
Yeah, right. Yeah, obviously his films are edited and he's a good editor, but you're right. I mean, I think that is really how he functions as a filmmaker. He is trying to construct the film as he films it, which is a form of pre-editing.
Vladimir Nabokov said, every novel teaches you how to read it. And I think it's such a brilliant quote that like mileage varies on that, where Thomas Pynchon novel teaches you how to read it in a very specific way that's more engaging than a Stephen King novel. Stephen King
Speak for yourself, Mike.
Hey, I love Stephen King, but like he's not tickling the same language centers in your brain, and I love him. I mean, once upon a time, there are books that he was more attempting that, but now it's like a straight up supermarket paperback kind of style, which is fine. Hey, he sells more, words than look. I don't even need to go there. Everyone gets it. He sells more than all of us. But like the same thing, like you're discovering the books, the movies, whatever it is, the language, the very specific language. And I think you have to, like, Soderbergh is discovering the language. And once he discovers the language, then he's filming that language. It's like, these are the angles we're using, and this is the way we're cutting, and this is the way we're doing it. He's not doing it after. He has to do it during. And I think that method, whatever the language is, informs then the narrative too. Like they work hand in hand. So it's weird to find it after the fact. But anyway.
Well, if I could just add one more thing on there, another hallmark of Soderbergh productions is that he doesn't like to use a video monitor. Most directors, I think, working in Hollywood today use one and often stare at it while the shooting is actually being done. He often, as we know, operates his own camera. But he doesn't want this remove between what's happening. He wants, there's a camera that's in between the camera operator and the action. That's unavoidable. You're making a movie. But he wants it to be as immediate as possible. He doesn't want people standing, 100 feet away looking at a screen. Like he wants this connection with the actors and what's unfolding. I think that's related.
I think so too. I think that's a huge part of it. I think that's a vital point. Yeah, because he has such a different perspective that like he's ingrained in it more than when you're watching the bank of monitors. Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's absolutely part of it. But going to what you were saying, so that's how studio directors of old used to work. Now it's the coverage days. Before is the stage it, light it, rehearse it, shoot it. And that was it, not the massive coverage. It was more economical, and that enables them to not only to shoot faster, and again, use the word economically, but also enable them to edit faster as well.
Absolutely. David Fincher would have never survived in the studio system. No. What's also surprising is how little CGI is used in the film. Some of the backgrounds seem a little like computer graphics, but, maybe that's because of the haze of the camera and the overall look and the uncoated lenses, and I don't know. But according to Philip Messina, who had been Soderbergh's production designer since Aaron Brockovich, making this their sixth collaboration, quote, the heaps of rubble were made from steel armatures with carved foam on top of them and rocks stuck on them. We moved them from the back lots to the sets and used them over and over like a kit of parts we were constantly rearranging.
Yeah,
that's not CGI.
Yeah, which is fascinating because like it's funny when we made first movie I wrote, Revealer, when you get to the underground tunnels, it was like 5 walls really that we just kept redoing, like as long as the two leads, the two women who are fantastic, are in those tunnels, like they're never in the tunnel for really that long. But as for The Good German, getting back to that, the archival footage that is in the film is indeed archival footage. Soderbergh and his team combed through hours and hours of World War II footage to get what they wanted, some of which came from A Foreign Affair, Billy Wilder's 1948 film, that actually shares a lot in common with The Good German.
One other little tidbit, Soderbergh was so committed to this period filmmaking that he shot the film in a 1.331 aspect ratio, which most modern theaters aren't equipped to handle. And that's why you get those black bars on the side, so it can play at 1.851.
Yeah, that's I was curious about that when like we were saying before, we had to rent the movie on Amazon because we had some DVD technical difficulties. But I was like, wow, I wonder if this is like some sort of pan and scan, something weird going on here, but it's actually a product of the film.
That was one of the things I most remembered from my first viewing of it. And listener aside, this film is streaming on Amazon. You can rent it. Both Mike and I, believing in owning the physical media and also hoping there was a director's commentary track, ordered the DVD, and both of us ordered multiple copies of the DVD that were defective. So I don't know what's going. They didn't age well, or it was a bad batch, but buyer beware.
And also no commentary, so we struck out hard.
Yeah, just pay the Amazon rental.
Yeah, it's actually a better transfer as well. It looks better, which I always apprehensive to say, but it's just a DVD. It's not even a Blu-ray, which doesn't always do wonders for quality, but the digital, whatever they did for the scan for Amazon, looks actually pretty good.
Yep.
I hate to say that, but it does. So anyway, all these things added together, suffice to say, Soderbergh was invested in the process, and he was optimistic in this movie too. In the New York Times piece I referred earlier, he said, quote, "You hope that there's a way of putting a film like this across, and not just for yourself. If a movie like this gets made and actually brings in a little bit of money, it means that someone else can make one too. I'm just hoping that we can find a way to the audience so that the person in line behind me who's trying to get Warners to do something off track can point to The Good German and say, that worked. Let's try this now." The question, though, is whether The Good German did indeed work, our opinions aside. And that's a fate left in the hands of audiences and critics.
Hi, this is Keir with a short interruption. Mike and I truly hope you're enjoying the first season of the Filmographers podcast, but today we're asking for your help.
Keir, wait, is this a pledge drive?
We're not part of Big Podcast. We're not even part of Little Podcast. We don't have a $100 million deal with Spotify or even a pay-to-play arrangement with a network you've never heard of.
That's right. We are proudly independent. But it sounds like you're about to ask our listeners for money.
I'm not asking them to listen to ads for BetterHelp, Blue Apron, or a mattress that comes in a box. I am asking them to join our Patreon community at patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast. We are not a recognized not-for-profit organization, but this is truly a not-for-profit operation. Even small donations will provide needed help in producing this show.
Okay, how much do you want? Let's get to the numbers.
How's this for a number? 0. Members who join our free tier, the Limey, will get access not only to all of our regular episodes, but also our monthly newsletter, where we'll fill them in on what we've been watching, reading, and thinking about.
Not bad. I can't wait to read that myself.
Don't forget, you also have to help write it. And for only $2 a month, the Magic Mike, listeners will get all of our regular episodes ad-free, plus our monthly newsletter, access to listener polls, and other bonus content like essays and extended versions of the show.
The Magic Mike. I like that.
For $4 a month, the Cisco, listeners will get everything we've already mentioned, plus our every other month Patreon exclusive episodes, like our one about the films Soderbergh didn't make. We're planning to discuss Soderbergh's short films, documentaries, TV series, and more. All that for an amount that's less than your daily Starbucks, Mike.
You totally cribbed that from a public radio pledge drive.
Wait till you hear my painstakingly accurate pronunciation of place names from around the world. Superfans who want to be do-gooders like Aaron Brockovich can support us at our highest level of $6 per month. For that, they get everything I've already mentioned and an every other month commentary track. These sustaining members will help subsidize valuable minutes of editing, the services we need to produce new episodes, and replacements for the tattered windscreens on our microphones.
We spend countless hours watching movies, listening to commentary tracks, reading interviews and articles, and Googling until our fingers are raw and chapped. Nobody should have to spend so much time on IMDb.
But we do it all for you, our listeners. Visit patreon.com/The Filmographers Podcast today to show your support for the Filmographers Podcast. Please note that we cannot accept used cars at this time.
Man, I hate Pledge Week.
I don't think it will come as a surprise to anyone that The Good German was, unfortunately, ultimately unsuccessful.
Yeah, it's disappointing to say the least. It was made for $32 million and earned back just $6 million worldwide, which seems
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Cate Blanchett at the time hadn't become a breakout star yet. She was wonderful in the movie, but she wasn't that big. But still, she was a name. Tobey Maguire is just post Spider-Man. The stars involved, there's Soderbergh. $6 million is low, but when you really look at things, it really seems like the movie, like, it never had a chance. It opened its first weekend in just 5 theaters, and its widest release at that point, it only played in 66 theaters total.
How does that happen? That's barely twice as many as Bubble.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And they
You're
got
right.
Clooney.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, how? It's really baffling. I mean, you look at the context. So the weekend, it did get up to 66 whopping theaters, which was January 19th, 2007. The top box office earner was Stomp the Yard, and that movie was shown on over 2,000 screens.
I'm honestly not even sure if I know what that movie is.
No.
Crazy.
Now, bad reviews. I don't think Stomp the Yard got stellar reviews, but bad reviews for The Good German certainly played a hand in the movie withering on the vine. And we'll get to some of those reviews in a moment, but it also had a lot of competition. God, talk about a different time, Keir. A lot of competition geared toward adult audiences. So also released in The Good German's release window were movies like Dreamgirls, The Pursuit of Happiness, Children of Men, Pan's Labyrinth, The Good Shepherd, Blood Diamond, and The Departed. Just to name a few, that's not all of them. That's a lot of movies directed at adults that were crowding cinemas.
Hard to go up against The Departed. Yeah, and during those winter months, you really have to have some awards buzz to help keep you afloat, and The Good German did not have that.
No, it did not. Critics and audiences alike were not kind to the film. I don't think there's much need to drag out the poor reviews, so I'll just give a few highlights. Glenn Kenny of Premiere called it a failed experiment, and Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune echoed his sentiment, giving it just 1.5 of 4 stars.
Wrong,
Michael. I love Michael Phillips.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, he's good. Just wrong here. A lot of critics echoed a similar sentiment that the film is technically marvelous, but narratively hollow. Also wrong. Claudia Puig of USA Today, Ella Taylor of LA Weekly, and Ian Free of Empire Magazine all shared a similar sentiment.
But some people liked it. Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times, who was filling in for Ebert more and more as his health declined, gave it 3 stars. He praised the cinematography and the performances, saying Soderbergh pays homage to the films he loves with grace and passion. Missing the point a little, but at least he liked it.
Oh, Roper.
Scott Tobias of the AV Club was also kind to it, and so was Lisa Schwartzbaum of Entertainment Weekly. So there are some endearing responses, just not enough to keep the movie afloat.
No, I mean, looking at it now with the luxury of time, it seems, just audiences weren't prepared for what the movie was. Now, I don't love sharing remarks from the comment sections, but
never read comments.
I did. That's how deep I went, guys. So I wasn't satisfied just with the articles. I read the article's comment sections too, and I found one. I actually paid off because it summed up the experience of the Good German really appropriately. This is from a Hollywood Reporter piece. This is a great piece. I covered a DGA, Directors Guild of America screening of The Pitcher in New York that did not go over well. Reportedly, the audience, ostensibly an audience of Soderbergh's peers, this is a DGA event, they raked him over the coals to the extent that the writer of the piece, Shay Crabtree, suggested that, quote, it seemed a night fight may break out.
Oh my God.
End quote. Now, the Hollywood Reporter never shies away from endorsing outlandish journalism, but still. Anyway, in the comment section, one person said this, and this is really good. After it had been so strongly sold as being in the vein of Casablanca, the audience was simply not prepared for such a nasty film, one which is devoid of any trace of humor and heart, and in which every character, even Clooney's, is an asshole.
Fair, well said. I think the first time I watched the movie, I just remember thinking, like, it's so good, but like, can't they say something funny? It took me a couple of viewings to truly appreciate how masterful it is.
It's funny. We praise Soderbergh a lot for clarity and economy. You have to really kind of work for your meal with this one.
You do. And, some of the works of art that I've engaged with most over the years are things that I didn't love the first time. I mean, some of my favorite albums I didn't love on first listen. So I think there's value in things that challenge us and that we have to go back to a couple of times. I mean, there are movies I loved on first viewing that I never thought about again, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, the pendulum swings both ways. And it's hard because you have to be really discerning. Do those hills indeed have gold? Do I go back? Time is a factor. But yeah, I have similarly discovered films that are much deeper than I thought upon first viewing, and films that I missed because I wasn't in the right mood or I wasn't in the right mindset or whatever. But this is a movie that definitely, you really have to kind of work for it. And that's not the worst thing in the world.
Listener, last week we recommended Bubble. This week we recommend The Good German. These are two mid-period Soderbergh films that don't get a lot of love, that I think surprised both of us quite a bit. And this is one of the reasons the pod is such a delight to me, certainly, is making some discoveries like this. I mean, I had seen The Good German. I had not seen Bubble. These are two of my favorite Soderbergh films.
Yeah, they rank up for me top 5, maybe top 10. Good German is definitely in there. Bubble is close. And it's they're really two remarkable films that, and we were talking about this a bit. It's unfortunate because it alarms both of us the excess problem that they're hard to, well, Good German's not hard to get. You can rent on Amazon Prime. Bubble is a different story, but it's still not the easiest maybe, but they really, really deserve and warrant more attention, more love than they get. I mean, they're Steven Soderbergh, for God's sakes. They deserve more.
We don't have the platform of Roger Ebert bringing Errol Morris to the masses, but from our little soapbox, we are telling you, check this movie out.
Agreed.
And at the time, the marketing of this film clearly did not help. The comment you read a moment ago, really nails how it failed. Depicting a movie as something that's not, we've both as authors dealt with marketing departments who just don't get what your book is about. I have had marketing departments try to retitle books in atrocious ways. Sometimes you just have to take a gamble and go see the movie yourself.
When Soderbergh and Clooney aren't filming Oceans 11 and 12 and 13, etc., they love to indulge their passion for adventurous projects. They obviously love and respect classic films, from Casablanca to A Foreign Affair to even Chinatown. But The Good German does a better job of paying tribute to those films than carving out its own personality. Yes, Soderbergh captures the techniques and the beautiful black and white photography of the 40s, and yeah, Clooney reminds us of Bogart, and Blanchett is kind of Dietrich-like, but it's great fun to watch them do the movie equivalent of a great cover song while you're thinking I'd still rather hear the original. Still, I'm giving this movie a mild thumbs up. A lot of style, not so much with the plot.
I am giving this movie a thumbs up too. I think it's a very ambitious film, and I think it's executed beautifully. It looks incredible. He uses original old war footage and he mixes it in with the footage he shot for the picture. They apparently used these old 1940s cameras to shoot the movie.
Yeah.
But it looks fantastic, and I think the acting across the board is great.
By the way, that clip was of Richard Roeper, who we mentioned earlier, who had become Ebert's co-host after Gene Siskel's death. The show was renamed to simply Ebert and Roeper, but in 2007, Ebert was struggling with his own many health issues, and guests were brought on to take his spot. In this case, it was Aisha Tyler, who in my opinion was awesome. She was one of the better Ebert fill-ins. She was great.
As long as it's not Ben Lyons.
Oh, God, I think you have to spray some holy water on your mic for uttering that name, Keir.
Oh, it was a rough period.
Oh, I mean, he was paired with Ben Mankiewicz, but even fucking Ben Mankiewicz couldn't save Ben Lyons. Anyway, one last thing I wanted to mention, and we kind of gotten this already, but we're hard on Clooney and Solaris, but he fucking rules in this movie. Like, bravo, Clooney. I think people see his best performances when he's playing like the zany kind of doofus, like Oh Brother, We're Out There.
I love him as a zany doofus.
I love him too. This might be better. Like, it's just a great nuanced performance. Excellent. Blanchett, revelation, fantastic, which now is just par for the course for her. We didn't quite know that then. Soderbergh asked her to channel Marlene Dietrich, who, by the way, starred in A Foreign Affair, which I mentioned earlier. And she was Dietrich and then some.
Just good performances, top to bottom. Tobey Maguire is kind of amazing as he plays this cornpone all-American doofus to the people around him, then reveals a vicious and venal side in private. I mean, who knew Tobey Maguire could do that? Beau Bridges is very solid as Colonel Mueller. Leland Orser is good as Bernie. And Robin Weigert, who, I mean, this is very close to my heart. Listeners may remember her for her unforgettable Calamity Jane in the series Deadwood. It's a small role, very small role, but she's excellent as the sex worker Hannah Lore.
Yeah.
Just the way she eats and talks, she's terrific.
Yes, the ham sandwich scene is pretty great.
God. Love her.
She was great. Everybody really brought it. I just wish more people watch this. And like you said, Keir, this is why we're here. And if you do watch it, listeners, please, I want to hear your thoughts. We both want to hear your thoughts on The Good German, good or bad. Tell us. We've got some great messages the last few weeks. One of which comes from Alex, who says, quote, "This is awesome. Coincidentally, I took it upon myself to watch all of Soderbergh's films in order a few weeks back, then discovered there was a podcast doing the same thing." Well, here we are. And another
serendipity.
Yeah, it works. Sometimes life's okay. And Josh, who said, "Great job. It felt like hanging out with you two at a cocktail party. I think I will have enough credits to finish my PhD on Steven Soderbergh by the end of season 1. Well, Josh, get your blue book ready because exam time is soon.
And we should also thank our very first Patreon subscriber, Mark Stevens, for signing up. Mark, we appreciate that so much. We hope many others will follow your example. It takes a village, and you are founding your own town.
Yeah, you're the whatever the head of a village is called. You're first, so you're
mayor. You're the mayor of Soderbergh Town, Mark.
Congratulations. So listeners, have you come around on Soderbergh's nostalgia experiment? Or are you still left cold by it? Like I said, let us know. And how you let us know? Well, you can reach us on Instagram at The Filmographers, on X at FilmographerPod, or on Letterboxd at Filmographers. Or you can send us a good old-fashioned email at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
And look, we're still a little podcast swimming in a vast sea of many, many movie podcasts. If you enjoy what we're doing, please tell your movie-loving friends about us. Subscribe on your platform of choice. Or you can go all in and support us on Patreon, like Mark, where you'll find ad-free versions of each episode, exclusive episodes, and much, much more. We have so many cool things planned for the Patreon. Visit us at patreon.com/The Filmographers Podcast.
Thanks as always to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who composed and played our theme music, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo.
Join us next week on the Filmographers Podcast when we'll follow Soderbergh as he rolls the dice on his third trip to his most successful and most crowd-pleasing franchise.
Never bet against the house or Soderbergh.